Hello and welcome to another DCD Talk. I'm Alex Dickens, Head of Broadcasting at Data Center Dynamics, and we're delighted to be discussing openness and standards within cooling with Rolf Brink, Immersion Project Co-Lead at the OCP. How are you doing, Rolf?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me again, Alex.
Well, thank you for coming on. For our regular viewers, you may have remembered Rolf joined me, Fuchs and Moises Levy a few weeks ago to discuss immersion standards for fluids. But today we're going to talk a little bit more broadly about standards as a whole. Rolf, I know this is a topic which is very important to you, and coming from the OCP, that's no surprise to our audience. But perhaps you could tell me, firstly, a little bit about why this is so important to you and why it's so important to the industry as a whole right now.
Sure. And look, we're talking, especially with my role in OCP, we're looking at the advent of a whole new technology ecosystem when it comes to cooling. It's an ecosystem that is disruptive by nature for a lot of the facilities around the world. Because suddenly you're going to have to deal with water infrastructures in your white space. There is a large variety of technologies coming in. Cold plate is a very clear technology which is now penetrating this ecosystem. Another technology which is coming in as well is immersion cooling. And we're expected to see a whole lot of hybrid forms. And what the industry needs is a set frame of references on which these technologies can be scaled, but also exchanged freely across a white space, across the data center landscape, and that is a critical element of any kind of new technology, that the industry can work with a standardized frame of reference. What does a technology mean? How do you deal with it? How do you implement it? How do you install it? How do you manage it? What does it change for your operations, for the way that you approach your operations? What does it mean for the design and build? And these are things that are very important questions that the industry is currently dealing with. And where we're going to need more and more centralized references to, hey, what does this actually mean?
Mm-hmm. And when we're thinking about what it actually means, presumably we're thinking about the future, what we're building towards. I know you've done a few recent pieces on projections and expectations. Perhaps you could help set a bit of context by talking about what we're looking at when it comes further down the line.
Yeah, sure. It's probably good to mention as well because, I've written quite a few articles over the past couple of years, and probably good to mention why I'm writing these, because it's not just to push myself out there or just to randomly throw out a message. I work with a large variety of clients with my professional day-to-day work. What I do within OCP is volunteer basis. My daily living I get out of my consultancy work, and at some point I very often find myself in a position where I have to explain the same thing to multiple clients. And what I tend to do, because it is preventing me from moving ahead with some of that work, I tend to put some of that content, some of the views, some of the analysis in public articles that I can refer my clients to as for setting the baseline. And what I'm doing I've recently started a whole new article series, which started last month with a forecast analysis. About a year ago, I did a forecast, a projection of growth for the liquid cooling markets and the liquid cooling industry. And with the advent of cold plate over the past year, the projections have come out completely different than what I forecast a year ago. And I found it really interesting to have a look at why I was wrong and whether I was making had some mistakes in my assumptions or my analysis. And it turned out that I did have the right information, I just didn't present it. And that is something that I found truly fascinating, looking at myself. Hey, why did I not present what I thought I knew? And that all boils down to the way that forecasts are typically done, looking at revenue growth in the market, looking at an analysis of growth of individual companies and combining that in an industry forecast, which results in a compound annual growth rate forecast, and you just project that across the ecosystem. But the real fascinating thing is that everybody in the industry had known for years that cold plate cooling was going to break through really soon. And most of us, including myself, had a pretty good idea where that tip over point would be. But none of the forecasts, including my own, actually worked that into that forecast. And that one of the realizations that typically is missed is the fact that organic growth doesn't work for technologies like liquid cooling because nobody wants liquid cooling. And that is really an awkward statement to make, and for somebody who is so involved with liquid cooling. But it is reality. You're not going to buy a cold plate driven system or an immersion system or anything like that if just for the sake of having something that is liquid cooled, right? You buy it because it's needed for something. And yes, of course, there have been a lot of adoption before last year already in various liquid cooling technologies, and that's been reflected in the revenue growth and industry forecasts. But they've all been focused on secondary challenges for POE purposes or sustainability purposes or drives to invest in certain specific capabilities. But what happened last year was that the chips certain chips went through a thermal barrier where it's no longer feasible to cool a chip with air. That means that if you have an application which requires certain hardware, the only way to run your application then is to buy that hardware which comes pre-equipped with liquid cooling. And that has caused a massive surge in cold plate technology over the past year. So what I've done now in that forecasting, for example, is that I've now been more focused not on how the individual companies in the ecosystem are doing in terms of growth and who's better or worse, and because that's going to be as volatile as it's going to be really volatile over the next couple of years. But I've now taken a much more technological approach to these forecasts where I'm looking at, okay, what are these necessity drivers and what will cause an inflection point for a certain technology? And that's how I've now reversed had a look at what I've done last year and where that went wrong, which is also why that article has that headline, like, I was wrong. It sounds like clickbait, but it's truly the essence of the article, right? And I've used those lessons to project that growth cycle for immersion cooling as well. And that allows you to take a very fundamental look at the market and the underlying technologies and how and why and when they will likely grow or become mainstream. And that gives a really interesting perspective to some of these forecasts and how this landscape is evolving. And the article that I published last week was the second article in the series, which is more focusing now on how IT equipment is evolving over the next couple of years, which is also based on everything that we can already see today and what the evolving requirements are for IT equipment and for these different applications and platforms, and what we're already seeing as trends on how the IT equipment ecosystem is responding to those demands. We're seeing a large diversification of chips, of type of processing units. Heterogeneous computing is really kicking off, driven by also the adoption of chiplets, which are already in advanced stages of development. Heterogeneous platforms really, in essence, it means that you have multiple different chips to deal with different types of processing, right? It's not just the CPU anymore. It's not that general purpose kit where you just add on some things. No, you get this wildly diversified ecosystem of chips and technologies within the system that will start facilitating a much broader range of applications. And these kind of trends, you can actually use the data of today and the requirements of today and the developments of today to create a bit of a focus on how that will shape that computing landscape. And that in turn gives a good view of, okay, so what does that mean for these liquid cooling requirements down the line, or the diversification of also that cooling landscape, where we're going to be seeing a lot more tailored cooling approaches that are associated not with a data center or a facility or a rack, but much more focused on, hey, what is the application that is being run? And then what is the hardware that is required, and then what is that optimized cooling technology for a specific application in a specific geography. And that drives that is a super interesting thing to look at. The next article is going to now just to round up these topics of the articles. Next month, or at the end of this month, early next month, I will be focusing on the article that combines those the two articles that I just published and focuses on the road towards 2030. And that's also where some of the most important things really come in. So what does that look like? How does that transition play out? What are the ingredients that are now missing that will need to be filled in? And how can you as a company or organization or an individual facilitate and align with that transition, with that with that transition in which is taking place across the industry, because these kind of things don't happen overnight. And every company in this ecosystem will have to devise their own strategy on how to effectively align with these kind of changes in the market. And we are talking about a new revolution within the data center landscape, or within the IT equipment landscape, and that can be daunting for a lot of organizations, and it really requires every organization to look at themselves. What are my core strengths? What are our goals in the market? How can we effectively align with this without necessarily jumping in and joining a disruption, which can be very appealing because that's where all the action is. That's where all the fun stuff seems to happen. But for a lot of organizations, it can be much more beneficial to play a supporting role for that transition wave, to solidify a position in that market over time without running some of the risks that are associated with the front side of the wave. And that's really what my day-to-day work is all about, to help facilitate these kind of views and these kind of strategies, not just for my clients, but also industry-wide, which is how I apply that within my activities in open compute. All right, which so far has been successful. Hope that's gonna remain that way, of course. But yeah, that's really what this is all about in terms of helping the industry foresee what's coming and helping the industry with the alignment with these kind of movements that are rooted in hopefully as much realism as possible.
And in this world where we're seeing increasingly complicated supply chains, the need for end-to-end services, more technicality that we need to pay attention to, I guess this is where openness really comes into its own, and openness presumably begets further openness. It's a bit of I think we alluded to it being a chicken and egg scenario before, but the more we put into it, the more we'll get out of it to help us develop guardrails to guide those projections into the future. I'm sure, back to, not to drill too deep on the I Was Wrong article, by the way, if anyone hasn't read it, it's a very, very nice read. But, you holding your hands up to, well, we could have done this differently. I suppose at the time, had other people been more open, those projections might have looked a little bit different themselves.
Well, and that's a bit of the thing. That's something I'm really exploring in that particular article as well. And I don't know if that's the case. Could think so, but the reality is almost all of the industry knew that it was coming. why did nobody project the massive uptake that was suddenly taking place for cold plate technology? As some organizations have been really looking ahead, have been putting a lot of money in it to make sure that they were ready for it. A good example is one of the IT equipment ODMs, which are based in the US, who have pre-scaled cold plate manufacturing capabilities and already had the designs ready for liquid cooled racks, and they're able to ship thousands and thousands of racks a month, liquid cooled racks, and they've just literally taken an enormous percentage of the liquid cooling market because they're the ones that are shipping the most liquid cooling technologies out there. Were they in time? Well, could argue that they were actually too early in it. And so, but everybody knew that that transition was coming. It's been shouted off the rooftops for years, but none of the projections actually reflected that sudden uptake, because these projections are historically and typically just made based on compound annual growth rate, which has nothing to do with this type of technologically driven adoption cycle. Right, so any forecast that says that shows the typical hockey stick that every startup will always show to their investors, right? So, oh yeah, we're going to start this, and then whoop, you go straight up towards infinity. That's something that comes across as something that is not necessarily credible. But if you read between the lines on all the years running up to now, everybody has been forecasting this in different ways. It's just that it never was positioned in revenue uptakes or market growth figures. And that's something that I find truly interesting, because when I do this type of analysis work, I'm also learning from what is commonly done in the market. Even when I don't necessarily agree with it, I follow suit, because, hey, that's what everybody will expect from these forecasts. And then when there is something popping up in your forecast that seems like crazy, you start tweaking that back down, because otherwise it becomes less credible. And those are the things that I'm guilty of myself, right? Because I've done that too. You also run the same risk in overestimating the market, right? Because, hey, maybe even I remember several talks from even Nvidia from about 1.5 years ago, where they were still blatantly stating, yeah, we can do everything with air cooling, so we don't need liquid cooling down the line. Oh, there you go. A new GPU comes out, and yeah, it's kind of tough to run those things without liquid cooling, right? So, I think that is a very truly interesting dynamic, and that's why I've taken that step towards. You know what? Nobody else seems to be doing this. Maybe it's time to bring this in, and doing this kind of analysis has never been my core business. It's something I'm doing on the side. So, and all these forecasts are probably going to be off as well. All I'm trying to do is to find comfort in what are factual things that you can see today, factual things that you can scientifically build upon, and make a forecast, make projections and predictions based on how IT equipment has evolved over the past 30 years, and what you're seeing now, and how that's likely to evolve over the next couple of years. It's tricky, it's risky, and the percentages that I'm projecting now for 2030 are probably going to be off. Don't bet on the exact percentages. The message, but that's also not the message with these forecasts. The message really is, hey, it's going in a certain direction. This is a potential outcome. There are probably some other disruption that will come along halfway that will completely force a transition in a different way. But aligning with these forecasts, and that's really what I'm trying to hand out to the market, is handing out some realistic foundation upon which to build forecasts to anticipate the industry, and aligning with that allows you to become more responsive to some of these changes, using that methodology which is rooted in current technology and how technologies are currently being scaled out, like quantum. Hey, yeah, brilliant development, quantum computing. Are we there yet? Is it going to be off the shelf tomorrow in every computer? Absolutely not. It's going to require a whole lot more, but we are seeing a lot of quantum simulations already taking place. That's where the development seems to be heading towards. And by 2030, yeah, we may be seeing some of these quantum chips really starting to penetrate the market. Is it going to be significant? Is it suddenly the half of the market is going to be doing quantum computing? Also, absolutely not. Because the way that you interact with those chips, with that type of methodology, you're not going to be running Windows or Linux off a quantum chip. That's not the essence of a quantum chip. It facilitates a particular type of calculation for a specific application that will have a place in that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, and that also responds to a question that I very often get. Yeah, but what happens when quantum computing breaks through? Isn't this all done? No, because that's not what quantum is. Also with optics, optical processing, it's going to be an application. It's not going to replace the architectures that we already have in place. And that's really also the essence of that compute ecosystem forecast. Like, hey, yeah, we're going to be seeing this massive diversification of hardware that is driven by application goals.
Yep.
Application-specific hardware, which is already a trend, which we're already seeing today, and that is very likely to become more dominant than and the general purpose as we know it, with just the main board, some CPUs and some memory, where you can have some add-on cards. That general purpose approach is destined to decline.
Yeah.
And it will be replaced by a lot of these more specialized kits and some of the heterogeneous compute approaches with multiple chips that are embedded in the systems. So yeah, I don't even remember whether I've responded to your
I guess it's case in point, though. Case in point, when it comes to, these standards, these next gen technologies, as we have openness, as we have standards, we'll learn more from it. We'll get there further, faster, and probably more efficiently, which is ultimately what we're all here to do. Rolf, I am going to have to call it because I'm afraid we've overrun a little bit, but I hugely appreciate you coming on, your openness, see what I did there, and really look forward to continuing the conversation with yourself and the OCP at a later date. To our audience, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another talk. Thank you.